afternoon is entitled The Importance of Food Sovereignty. My name's Caitlin Reed. I'm an assistant professor in the Native American Studies Department at Humboldt State University and a member of the Yurok tribe. And I get to be the moderator for our session today. Our panel discussion is going to look at the role of food sovereignty in post-capitalism planning and the importance of indigenous food sovereignty specifically to decolonization and anti-capitalist work. Our panelists are going to discuss their work in food sovereignty movements in Humboldt County and beyond. To begin our session, we'll begin with a land acknowledgement today. And so I'll screen share for just a moment here. So as part of our virtual gathering, we are probably likely joining today's session from a variety of tribal territories. And so I'm speaking to you today from Baduat, or the Mad River, in Wiyot ancestral territory. I encourage our folks in the audience to put the tribal territory you are joining us from into the chat so we can see whose lands we're speaking from today. And so I begin by acknowledging I am on the land of the Wiyot peoples. This includes the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, and Blue Lake Rancheria. Humboldt State University is located in Arcata. This is known as Gudini, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Wiyot peoples continue to remain in relationship to these lands through ceremony, culture, and stewardship. They are important parts of not only the history of this area, but also in continuing knowledge of this place, right? The future of this place. Land acknowledgements are a first step, right? If they are not accompanied by action, right, they are merely performative, right? And so I have 3 action items listed for you here today. First thing, easy, everybody can do it. Go find out whose land you're on. Right, you can go to nativeland.ca. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry. There's a number you can text if you Google it. The next thing you can do, also free, you can go and educate yourself about land acknowledgements. You can go check out this lecture by HSU NAS Department Chair Dr. Kutcha Risling-Baldy, What Good is a Land Acknowledgement? Third thing you can do, you can support the HSU Food Sovereignty Lab and Cultural Workspace. I'll drop these links into the chat in a little bit when our panelists are speaking. Cool, people are on it. Thank you, appreciate it. Also, if there's any Wiyot folks in the house, I'll make a quick announcement. We're in the process of naming our Food Sovereignty Lab. We'd have a survey we'd like Wiyot folk to fill out about the naming of the lab, so I'll drop that in the chat in a little bit. And next, I'm going to provide a really brief introduction of our panelists. I'm only going to say a very little bit about all of your accomplishments. So please feel free to expand upon these introductions and share much more about yourself. We have Dr. PennElys Droz. She's Anishinaabe, mother of 5, a program officer for the Indian Collective, and a founding board member of Sustainable Nations. She has been working in service of redevelopment of thriving, ecologically, cultural, and economically sustainable and resilient Indigenous nations for over 20 years. We have Evie Ferreira. Her ancestral heritage is Yaqui, Mestiza, Mexican American, and Portuguese. She is on the HSU Food Sovereignty Lab Steering Committee at Humboldt State, and she was also one of the original students who helped organize and found the Humboldt State Food Sovereignty Lab. She is currently the Native Foodways Program Manager at the Cultural Conservancy, and she also volunteers with the Padawat Community Food Garden in Arcata. We also have Tamara McFarland. Tamara grew up in Humboldt County and attended local schools from kindergarten through college. Her and her husband are raising 2 children in Eureka. She is a part of the Cooperation Humboldt Food Team. She's passionate about food equity, local resilience, animal rights, and environmental protections. And she's also a graduate of the Cascadia Leadership Training Program. And so I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists that are here today. So how our afternoon is going to proceed. The first thing you've probably noticed, you're being recorded. You are not able to unmute yourself at this time, but we will have time later in the session where you can verbally ask a question if you use the raise hand feature. And so we're going to jump into a a moderated discussion. First, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. And then around 4, we'll turn to audience questions. So if you have a question for our speakers during the session today, you can go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll keep track of them and make sure they get to our speakers towards the end of our session. All right. I think that's all the housekeeping I have for you. So we'll start with some panel introductions. So if each of our panelists could take a couple minutes and tell us a little bit more about who you are, and more importantly, how you came into work around food sovereignty, right? And the importance you see in doing that food sovereignty work. So whoever would like to start introducing themselves, feel free and go ahead.
I'll jump in. So thanks for the introduction, Kaitlin. It's really an honor to be here with you 3 amazing women. I'm Tamara. I'm from Cooperation Humboldt. I am a co-founder of Cooperation Humboldt, and I am an anchor of our food team. And I'm going to share my screen for just a minute and just briefly share a little bit about Cooperation Humboldt. So we exist to incubate and cultivate a solidarity economy in this region. And we do that through a range of program areas. You can check out our website, and then under the program tab, you can find all the things we do. So today we're talking about food, and I'd first like to mention a little plug for the WIOT honor tax. One of the ways that we believe we need to build food sovereignty is by supporting the original inhabitants of this land and their autonomy. So as an organization, Cooperation Humboldt has committed to giving 1% of our full budget every year as a voluntary tax to the WIOT people. You can find out more about that on our website under programs, education, and then WIOT honor tax. And I'll just jump right into food team stuff. So the basic idea with Cooperation Humboldt's food team is we believe that access to nutritious and culturally appropriate food is a human right, and we're working to create a world where no one will ever go hungry due to lack of wealth or income. And our goal is to return Humboldt County to the regenerative, life-sustaining food forest and ecological haven that it once was, with balance between human and non-human elements of this place. So from that goal, we landed on strategies for getting to that goal and tactics for getting to that goal. And that kind of makes up what all of our projects are. And I won't spend the time to go over every single thing because I want everyone to have time, but you can find this on our website, and then you can click on the different links here to see the work that we're doing. The things that are really active for us right now are our free mini gardens that we provide to low-income residents, along with coaching to help them become gardeners. And our community food guide. I'm super excited and happy today. I just got back from the printer where I got to see these giant machines that were 2 stories tall with the papers running through them that were the pages that we've been working on for the last 6 months for this first year of our local food guide. To which Kaitlin was a contributor. So thank you, Kaitlin. But there's tons of information about the things we do here on the site. And I'm just super grateful to be here and can't wait to hear what Evie and PennElys have to share. So I'll pass it with that.
I guess I can go next. Thank you, Caitlyn and Tamara. It's good to see PennElys, Droz, and everyone that's here. Thank you for having me. Right now, I'm calling in from the Federated Indians Great Rancheria, which is Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo territory. And I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona, specifically Barrio Hollywood. And my family is from Hermosillo, Sonora. So I feel that it was mostly my nana tatas and all my aunts and uncles that shared food sovereignty with me, talking about harvesting espinacas in the desert and hunting rabbit and growing chile and learning how to grind corn for tamales, and just listening to a lot of stories around food and gathering around food, and also just reveling in that excitement and all the aromas and the pleasure of having that time with them. So when I continued on my own, I always, I think, identified with that in every place. So I wanted to honor ancestral foods that my friends shared with me, and that inspired me to continue. Currently, I'm on the Native Foodways program at the Cultural Conservancy, and the focus there is to uplift traditional ecological knowledge so that it can be applied on ancestral territorial lands. And that means supporting and restoring cultural access to foods and empowering harvesting rights, and also supporting land rematriation and seed rematriation. Thank you. I'll pass it to PennElys.
Oh my goodness. Ani Manogishgad, PennElys Droz, Nin Indigenous. My family is Anishinaabe descent through my mother's line. The bio was perfect. Thank you for sharing that little piece. Something that I'd also like to share is my heart's just very full in this space for a number of reasons. One is that I grew up on just right on the border of the Shirai Rancheria in Trinidad, California, and immersed. I actually thought I was Yurok until I was 10. And because my family was just sort of integrated into the community, and until Bruce Kay actually, so some of you might know him, was like, do you know where your people are from? I'm like, I'm Chippewa. I don't know what that means though. And so I grew up and really learned what that meant, and realized how much culture my family kept, and that gave me sort of a passion and an impetus to go back home. Even though, so my mother lives in Trinidad, and my sister and my other siblings, and I have nephews, and my introduction to food sovereignty is that my mother is a plant person. So I was raised harvesting nettles, and, in the Trinidad, I go back to Humboldt, I go back to Trinidad and check on my mushroom patches and check on my nettle patches. I was a McKinleyville High School dropout, and spent all of what would have been my high school years in the woods of Trinidad by myself, harvesting medicines, learning from my mother, also. And even though I wasn't raised with a lot of I don't even know if my mother realizes the depth of cosmology that she offered me, because naturally, as I was growing up and learning, it was just a given that the land is alive and teaches you, and that the world is a living presence that teaches you. And so in my growing up and harvesting and all of that stuff, that is truly like the foundation of any of my food sovereignty work. So, now I actually taught for Humboldt State too for 5 years in Native Studies, and I live on currently. I moved to Tucson in December of 2010, following an opportunity. I moved to the city of South Tucson, Barrio Hollywood, and I've been basically immersed in Evie's ancestry, lineage culture, and have learned, I definitely believe in wherever you go, my forest family definitely had to build networks and offer a lot of just prayers and asks for recognition of what we were doing down here in the desert. Both from the land and the ancestors and the people. So I've definitely worked in service of local people, and learned a lot to place myself in the desert here for a lot of years now. So anyway, my heart's full being here. I Yeah, I don't necessarily consider myself an intensive food sovereignty worker, although I always am a grower and I always share what I know. I do teach permaculture, and I do I do offer my background. My professional background is I call it Indigenous regenerative design. So I have an engineering degree. It's applied to construction, building design, infrastructure, energy, ecological wastewater treatment, ecosystem restoration, and agriculture. And so I do some of that work, and I also now work for the Indian Collective. And we definitely have a strong funding priority. We're a multifaceted organization. Please look us up, indiancollective.org. But we do offer investment and grants, and with a specific focus to food sovereignty. Thanks, Kaitlyn. So I'll just leave that there for now.
Thank you all so much for those lovely introductions. It's so great to hear about the relationships to your foods and how you all came into this work. So my first big question for the panel, I want to start us with the basics, right? We're coming to this conversation from a variety of levels of exposure. And so I want us to kind of talk about the term food sovereignty. What sort of things are we implying or talking about when we evoke this idea of food sovereignty? And so if folks could kind of speak to where this term comes from, what types of, problems in our current food systems does food sovereignty work to address? And so I don't know if there's anybody who'd like to take the first stab at that, but I'll open that question up to the panel.
We're all waiting for each other.
Well, my second question is going to be about Indigenous food sovereignty, specifically in the way that is distinguished. So maybe Tamara, if you don't mind, I could put you on the spot for this first one, and then Evie and PennElys, please chime in and add more.
That sounds good. I don't mind at all. So I am newer to this, and it wasn't a part of my cultural background or my family upbringing. So I definitely am looking forward to learning from Evie and PennElys and others. I'm newer to this work, but I have been kind of immersed in it for the last several years. And basically what I said about the mission and the vision of our team, the idea that nobody should ever be in a position of being without healthful and culturally appropriate food for any reason. Like, it shouldn't be a commodity. It shouldn't be about turning a profit. It shouldn't be about maximizing yield. It should be an integrated piece of what it means to be a human being living in the world. And it touches on just every aspect of life, from a very individual level to a broader societal level. Having access to food makes everything else possible. And not having access to food is interwoven with all kinds of other problems and suffering that we see in the world. So I'm just super excited about really the hands-on putting it into practice in this community kinds of projects. That's what excites me. So, we're doing things like going out and planting community fruit trees with our neighbors. We've planted over, I think, around 250 fruit trees over the last couple of seasons. And last year was the first year that we started our low-income mini garden initiative, and we did 260 last year, and we're already well underway with that again this year. So for me, it's all about just, empowering people to make that connection again to a piece of our communal life that used to be so integrated for most people and now is so separated from our lives. So.
Thank you. Evie or PennElys, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think something that a lot of students learn from the get-go is that there was the La Via Campesina. That was an international food summit in 1996. And so that was kind of where there was the first, like, I guess, proposed food sovereignty definition, and that came from the Declaration of the Nationality. And so it was in recognition of farmers coming together with fishers and those who were landless and had been impacted by the diaspora. And so when I started to, I guess, learn from, my own family's history, as well as like my neighbors within like the indigenous nations near where I lived or wherever I was located, it just expanded into the realm of having the right to decide how to support culturally appropriate foods being brought into your home. And, when we can become reconnected with seeds that were like heirloom seeds to our family, and, what it means to protect the seeds and waters, as well as have like an ongoing intergenerational relationship, and not just by securing food, but also uplifting like specific stories. A friend, shared with me that the songs that he sings for his harvesting places are going to be different than maybe what his like cousins sing. And so I think there's this like interweaving of our land-based knowledge specific to like my Yaqui foodways versus like just a food system. So I'll just add that for now.
And I'll just add a little bit of something to sort of build off and underscore what folks have already said, which is, food sovereignty in general is people being able to determine their own food system. And not only like what foods they have access to, but how those foods are traded. What are the terms of that trade? Preservation of traditional foods. But it's definitely deeply tied into community and bioregional people power. And so just to sort of reinforce that.
Great, thank you. Tamara, did you want to say anything about the 6 principles that you put into the chat? Okay.
No, I just, Evie mentioned that reference, so I was putting it in for the visual learners.
Thank you, I appreciate it. So thank you all for educating us on some of the important, like necessary to know basics about what we mean when we use this language of food sovereignty. I'd like to direct a question at Evie and PennElys, if that's okay. And so often we will hear this phrase, indigenous food sovereignty, right? And so can you say a little bit about why or how indigenous food sovereignty has a layer of distinction from food sovereignty? And if you could say a little bit about the impact that colonialism, right, and capitalism has had on traditional food systems. I think that would be really important. So.
Yeah. Evie, I'll just always let you go ahead because I am just such a talker that I should, yeah, you should go first.
Okay. That is such a, I like these 3-part questions because I feel like it makes us move through time in a way that's not linear, but to understand how our ancestral foodways are integral to like everything that informs me, for instance, of my own heritage and my identity and how I'm self-determined through my practices. So I know that specifically when tending to seeds, for example, the reason why there was such a great diversity is because in our languages alone, it reflected kind of like how you had a relationship with your food. So I think for me, that's really important to understand that, like, as Tamara was saying, like, these are not just commodities, they're gifts, and how we tend to those gifts and understand what's happening bioregionally is our way of also like practicing our stewardship. So right now, if like basketry materials are impacted by colonial systems of, tending the land, meaning like herbicides or pesticides are put into these places, we're going to suffer from that. The plants are going to suffer from that. And that's a practice that stems from a colonial extraction, as well as like a disregard for relationship and what it means to think, generations ahead for, being able to, as PennElys was saying, maintain our cosmologies, our relationships that inform us of that place-based, significance. And so I think that another aspect of colonialism that really, I would say with, food sovereignty, is that the diaspora of, how we end up where we are and why, families were relocated and taken away from their foodways, intentional burning and destroying of foodways, meaning like orchards, and, the devastation that the bison also went through during that time period. And it's very important to recognize that by removing the sustenance that's necessary, elders and the leaders in our Indigenous nations were then forced to make decisions, that impacted like the practice, maintaining and being where you are. That's quite a bit. So, but I'll pass the mic to PennElys. I know she has some good words.
Absolutely, Evie. Yeah, I'm gonna start with like the colonialism and capitalism question as well. But this is Wasea. She's 3. Yeah, like as Evie just touched on, the expansion of the globalized capitalist economy that occurred with colonization. Like, the displacement happened with the intentional degradation and destruction of our traditional economies, which were, of course, food-based. And that was the first step of removing people from their spiritual relationships and responsibilities to their homelands. I'm glad that, Chase earlier in this conference, if you were with that in the beginning, he was brave enough to speak to a lot of our peoples, no matter what continent your Indigenous ancestors are from. Colonial, the pre-capitalist economies based on the belief that other people's resources can be yours, based on the belief of whoever can conquer has rights. Okay, Becca, honey, sorry, y'all. That's what underpins all this, right? And so a lot of our ancestors were intentionally removed from their spiritual relationship and responsibility to land and the things that give us life, our foods, our waters, our earth, right? And so it's sort of a universal thing. And so inherently in Indigenous, when I think about Indigenous food sovereignty, Indigenous food sovereignty is land back. Indigenous food sovereignty is not only people having decision-making determination and power over the foods that they have access to and how those foods are traded, but it also is a healing process. It's also a return and a rebuilding of those spiritual relationships with your land, with your ancestors, with your old knowledge, with how to process your traditional foods. I mean, it's an entire healing process that is really beautiful, and has that component of reconnecting people. And true indigenous food sovereignty is not possible without, and I'm going to clarify land back, because I know that's a nice little hashtag, and us at Indian Collective, we have a land back campaign and all that stuff. But just to clarify what I even mean by that is yes, literally land back. Nobody needs 600 acres, right? and so absolutely, literally land back, because with land comes the ability to restore those relationships. And, remember how to tend, remember how to provide life. Also with land comes the, and an intensively bioregional, but also including trade, food economy. Oh gosh, sorry. My co-presenters know that I have 2 little girls at home, and I'm alone with them. And so if they look like they're going to fight, I'm going to get distracted, but I think they're going to be okay. So please forgive me a little bit as I trail off, but let me get my point back. Land back. There we go. Literally land back. Also, if land can't be literally given back, which land is everything that it's all about. That is our potential for economies that can be regenerative. Like if you don't have land, you don't have nothing, right? And but also restoring indigenous care to land that can't be given back. A lot of cities, a lot of states, the feds, there's a lot of land out there that has relationship to people. People, harvesting relationships, ceremonial relationships, restoring that indigenous care to those lands. That's indigenous food sovereignty. So there's both a spiritual and I hate to say it, political, socio-political, deep component to indigenous food sovereignty movements, which includes our ability to shape and determine our own spiritually based economies. I'm going to drop a little article in the chat just for future conversations. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll recommend another resource really quickly. So we have a morning session people can check out. PennElys just dropped a cool article. And then I wanted to let folks know about this really important book. It's called Salmon and Acorns Feed Our People. And I could talk about it for a while, but I'll just drop one figure that I think does such a great job of illustrating the impact of settler colonialism on indigenous foodways. So in a study done by Ron Reed and Kari Norgard, prior to the genocide in California, so like in 1850, Karuk people were eating on average about 450 pounds of salmon per person per year, right? As of 2020, Karuk people on average eat less than 5 pounds of salmon per year, right? And so thinking about like the so they argue that this might be the most dramatic dietary transformation that has ever occurred in North America, right? And so when we're thinking about indigenous food sovereignty, right, there are structures in place that prevent that, and things need to be torn down, right? Like dams, as a very like clear example, right? Thank you both so much for that. I think that's an important kind of clarification and distinction to be making in this discourse of food sovereignty. The next question I have for you all I'd like to ask you to think about the work you are doing in the food sovereignty movement. And I'd like us to talk about some of the challenges or structural barriers that prevent food sovereign communities from existing, thriving, flourishing. And so what are the structural barriers that we are up against right now? So if folks could say a few words about that, that would be excellent.
I can go first. I guess currently, as Kaitlyn was saying, myself and Dr. PennElys Droz are on the Food Sovereignty Lab Committee. And this last fall, we did a speaker series, and I really recommend if anyone has time to check that out. And one of the talks, the partners that are currently, a part of Cafe Olone in Olone territory over here, they spoke about how you can have an equal authority, a sense of understanding that when you want to go harvest something that's, medicine or particular to your family, that even though those barriers of the law saying you can't enter those spaces because it's privately owned land or it's, corporatized spaces, that you should empower yourself and look to your inner circles and understand, like, with that equal authority, you can go there and do that in the right way. And that's just one barrier of many. So I'll go ahead and pass that, but I just really appreciate how they termed it, to embody that equal authority, to understand, like, with each step that we take towards that, like PennElys was saying, it's a restoration within our practices, but it's healing as well. And it's healing for the land, because Kat Anderson speaks to that. When you tend the land and you harvest it, it appreciates that and it thrives. And
Great. Thank you, Evie. Tamara, is there anything you'd like to add about your work with Cooperation Humboldt?
Yeah, I guess in my mind, it's hard to pin down any one specific barrier because there are so many, but they're all interwoven and they all have to do with, capitalism and colonization and heteropatriarchy and all the things that we're here talking about dismantling this conference. Yeah, it's a complex web of things, but the things that give me hope are really the things that are kind of happening at the micro and the local levels. And I see those things happening like all over the world. And I feel like it's, beginning to be that, that effect of like the imaginal cells coming together. And, I have hope in the things that I see going on here in Wiyot territory.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that just, was making my heart feel so full is I'm getting old. I'm not so young anymore. I'm 40 now, and I'm just at that age where I can look back and see all the things that my friends and, dreamed about and wanted to fight for when we were in our 20s. That we thought, well, maybe in our lifetimes, maybe not, but maybe in our lifetimes. There is work happening now across the world that would have only been a dream of ours 20 years ago. And I'm sure that folks with more bird's eye view than I, with more years than I, know that much, much better than I do. So, the fact that we're even having this conversation is profound. It really is. So challenges. A few challenges are land. A big challenge is land access. I dropped in the chat about the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. If you are a Native American, it feels so funny to say that, but if you are a United States Native American in relationship to a reservation, then check out the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. What some folks don't know is that in 1860, the Dawes Allotment Act passed, and it allotted, it took reservation lands which were communally held, and in most Indian lands across the U.S., and divided it up into 160-acre parcels and gave the title to those 160-acre parcels to every single male head of household. So that really messed a lot of things up as far as like gender and power relations. It also came with a lot of, really intense cultural assimilation programs. But now what that's led to is now we have lands that are owned, like legal title owned by 300, 400 people, And so there's a lot of on-reservation Indian land that cannot be farmed, that cannot hold a buffalo herd, that cannot hold a fruit orchard, and cannot be, be properly taken care of. And so an Inland Tenure Foundation has a lot of great resources. The seed there is that also will require a lot of healing. So that's an on-reservation challenge. Off-reservation challenges is, our land bases were really intensively reduced. A lot of us cannot redevelop our traditional food economies precisely as they were. And so, one thing that I always think about in that way is, well, you root yourself deep in your values. You root yourself deep in your values with your community. You figure out, you write those down. Like, what are the values that make us who we are as a people? Write those down. What are the things that are important to us? And then as you're developing your new food economies, have that be foundational. Like, make a mural of that on your wall. and as you're moving forward, have that be your guide, right? Have those values, have those cosmologies and responsibilities be your guide to these new economies that we're figuring out how to have right now. And then there's also the challenges of, as we are developing, I would encourage folks to look at the farm bill that passed, the latest farm bill that passed. Has a lot of great new shifts that have been made to allow Indian ag to flourish. We have the ability to develop our own food codes. There's, in order for us to engage in trade that can, and I'm personally, I believe in global trade on a human scale, but I personally believe that scaling back economies, I do not believe we should develop our economies to be able to sell our products across the nation. I have been involved in enough, sort of business developments on the back end to feel like what my belief is that that is not sustainable. You can't be fully responsible for for all of the impacts of your decisions if you are producing a product that's going to be selling all over the place. And so figuring out what is the scale that we want for our food economies that will allow our people to live well, and all of us to live well, and to recognize what scale really is that. But we have been limited by needing a certain level of access to investment resources to develop our ag, health and safety protocols, and we have to jump all those hoops in order to be able to really get our food into a good tradable form. But there's, again, look into the Farm Bill. There's a lot there. Look up tribal food codes. Those are, there's a lot of support out there. The Intertribal Ag Cooperative is another great resource. We're moving through these barriers. So.
Great. Thank you all so much. And I'm also thinking about, kind of ethics or protocol around how we treat our food relatives, right? And so, not to get into this whole big conversation, but I've been thinking about Nordic aquaculture all week long, right? And what is our responsibility to treat our kin, right? And so thank you all so much. I want to give a reminder to our audience. If you have a question for our panel, you can go ahead and throw it into the chat, and we'll get that. We'll get to those in just a little bit. And so I have one last question for the panel, and really this is an opportunity for you to just say anything you want that you haven't had an opportunity to say yet. So if there's something you're thinking about or something you'd really like to share with our audience today, this will be your opportunity before we get to audience questions. And so my big question, which is really just a placeholder. Feel free to kind of conclude in whatever way you would like. What would you like our audience to do now? What are things that they can do? And then when we talk about post-capitalism, when we talk about decolonization, why food? Like, why do we need to center that conversation around food? I know that's a big one, but you can use this opportunity to conclude your thoughts in whatever way you see fit. So I don't know if there's somebody that would like to start, but that's my last question for you. And then we'll turn over and hear what the audience is thinking about. Or I'll add an appendix.
I'll talk.
Okay, great.
First, I just have to tell PennElys, your talk last year that you did in Arcata was the last thing that I did before COVID. It was the last time I hugged somebody who wasn't a family member. It was, I like see your face and I remember that night. Yeah, I mean, I guess my closing thought would just be that for anybody who, especially people who are here in this region, you're here because you care about this, obviously. And I just would invite you to take a next step to make a commitment to yourself of how are you going to get involved? It doesn't have to be huge. It can be huge, but it doesn't have to be huge. What can you do to work for this and to add your talent and your gifts to what we're trying to build? And that there are so many ways that folks can engage, whether it's through, all the different things that are happening through Native American Studies and the Food Sovereignty Lab, supporting that, getting involved with the volunteer opportunities with Cooperation Humboldt, donating to the We Out Honor Tax. I just encourage folks to make a commitment to this work, large or small, and act. Don't just stew, because stewing and worry about all this can be paralyzing. You got to get out and do something.
Man, this is such an exciting question, because do all the things. And remember that none of our relationships are strictly transactional, right? That you're constantly potentially consenting to learn in public, that you're consenting to learn with someone you do or you don't know, that you're learning from trees, that you're learning from the water, that you're learning from maybe you're reacquainted with your own ancestors. And I hope that's the case. That we can be unsettled in a way that is meant to open space for learning from, Tamara and Kaitlin and PennElys and anyone in this chat. And for showing up means that maybe you're new to the conversation. And as you learn more, you'll realize there are lots of models and lots of dreamers and those who have been practicing. And as Dr. Droz was saying, had that desire to see where it'll go. And here we are today. So I think action-wise, I always think of Chief Kaitlyn Sis in the movie where they're returning the salmon. I forgot the title, so I'll look for it in a second. But there's a point where she's in her kitchen and they're having lunch and they're giving their ideas and proposals for this returning of the salmon, dancing salmon home. Thanks, Kaitlyn. And everyone's going back and forth. And I think it's the state park officials, if I got it correctly, who are like, okay, well, basically I'm paraphrasing. We'll include your proposal out of 1 to 20 or something. And it's that's not the point right now. This is not a proposal. And so Kaitlyn says, to paraphrase it, she says, this is not a retirement plan. To talk about what you said, Dr. Reed, our relationships, right? We're not making plans so that we can retire and hope it goes off and does a good thing. This is a consistent relationship. It's going to keep happening. It's never going to stop. It's either regenerative or regenerative to the max. So I want you to be excited. I want you to feel that it's tough. It's very difficult to process information in which, many, many people and all kin have been hurt and impacted. But it's also very important to realize that many people have been modeling and practicing to continue the work. So as I share these titles by Enrique Salomon, one of the things that stand out in that book is that he says in different parts of the world, we are, because of colonialism and capitalism, we've come accustomed to eating the landscape of some other place. So when you really visualize that, like what are you eating and where does it come from? It could be far away, like Dr. Droz was saying. Like you're eating the food far, far away that's being tended to most likely by other indigenous groups or, small farmers. So just realize that as we come closer to home and we try to practice how to take care of our bioregions close to home and support one another, it's so that we can also support people far, far away. So, okay, pass the mic.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so I feel like a focus on food sovereignty and foods is deeply foundational to dreaming our way out of capitalism. Nothing inherently connects us so profoundly to the earth, to our ancestors, to the knowledge of our ancestors, like food. All of our knowledge of plants and animals and all of that came from these reciprocal lived relationships, and we are the inheritors of that. So as we deepen ourselves into, learning about harvesting, learning about seed saving, learning about hunting, learning about fishing and growing our own food and providing for our families, the more you literally do that act every day, the more that you acknowledge that every day. And I actually love it how medicine plants, I was just talking with a girlfriend about how medicine plants grow in abundance and profound diversity the most in human disturbed areas. And these plants are offering themselves. They have an active relationship with you, whether or not you remember that right now or not. And so nothing will heal you and your heart and your spiritual relationship with the earth like food. And I always think about how and it's so easy. It's so easy compared to some of this other restructuring work we got to do. Like that just touches your whole heart, and connects you with others. So I think that's why it's just so vitally important as a place to begin. And yeah, just to share what other people have said. I think that important things to do are to go out and smell the dirt and learn, remember the ancestors of the people that are present. Remember that history is encoded in the land. Remember, and learn all you can about the medicines and the foods in your area. And you'll be profoundly deepened, and you'll be given wisdom and power that will guide any future work you're doing in food policy or, your computer work or your paperwork or all of the tedious, terrible things that we have to do in order to advance this work, will be fed by that wisdom and relationship, from just getting out there.
I want to thank all of you so much for all of the beautiful insights you've shared with us today. And so we're now going to switch gears, and I'll quit asking questions, and instead we can hear some questions from the audience. So if there's something you want to ask our panelists, please throw it into the chat now, and hopefully we'll get to it. So we'll start with the first question. What other movements does the food sovereignty movement align with, need to work with closely to achieve its goals? Are there pieces of legislation, right, that might need to be changed to allow us to meet goals within the food sovereignty movement? Do we consider the food sovereignty movement as a component of the solidarity economy movement? And so I will, I'll let you all respond and offer your thoughts on that first question.
I'll chime in to say, to answer the piece about, whether food sovereignty is a component of the solidarity economy movement. I would say it absolutely is. And also, just acknowledge that, a solidarity economy movement is basically re-indigenizing. So it's not like it's some new thing that's, it's a newer term that's maybe come up more recently, but it's not a new idea. It's more of a return to an old idea. But I think it's super foundational to solidarity economy or re-indigenization, partly because it's just so foundational to survival. And because, there is that really strong connection component of it's a way that you can connect to the earth and like natural cycles and the dirt and the plants and the seeds. And there's really just something transformative, I think, about that. Whether you're doing it alone or in community in some way. Yeah.
I guess I'll go real quick. I think just thinking about today and, how we respond to COVID and how we can understand that, especially like within my own Indigenous community, seeing everyone come together and be able to provide medicines, and understand like how do we stock up on food? How are we going to tend to this like potential impact on food justice in the future? And how are we going to see that intersecting with the way COVID has, disrupted our food distribution, right? That happened. Also, farming the past 4 years and more recently during, these fires, getting out there and using an N95 mask for a couple hours because of the smoke. It makes it really clear that, here in California, all the farmers who never got a break or didn't have enough support, right, during COVID to perhaps get away and have services for health or better conditions to farm in. That's very difficult. It's not, comfortable to wear a KN95 mask while you're doing labor and you're trying to avoid smoke. And so I think the food sovereignty movement aligns with the fact that our food distribution issues are real. And we saw that, especially this last year. Also, as far as like solidarity economics, there are places that were not only devastated by COVID, but by, climate change, right? So there's flooding and the major fires. So it's really important to understand why we are trying to tend to land in the way we are, not only through our relationship with the food, but also to discontinue colonial capitalistic practice with tending the land, So I think that was most of the question that the person asked, so I don't want to go hog that mic too much.
PennElys, is there anything you want to add on this one?
Yeah, just, all of these movements are all tied together, and there's political aspects, there's social aspects, there's healing aspects, there's, as we're talking about the land and healing our relationship with the land and with trade, in order to do that well, we also have to heal our governance structures and our social relationships and our gender relationships and our relationships with our children. And I mean, it just is all connected. And, our bodies as expressions of this earth, and deepening into the sacredness of not only our relationship with the earth, but our relationship with one another. And the healing justice. I love the fact that has become a thing that needs to occur to move all of these movements. Woo! Here comes the teenagers. Becca. It's just all connected.
Yeah, I want to Tamara, I'm going to read out the comment you put in the chat. Food justice, environmental justice, racial justice, workers' rights. So I think like all of those are fundamentally interconnected. And when we're thinking about like where food deserts exist, right, they're often in low income or communities of color, tribal nations, right? And we see some of the highest rates of health related disparities due to food access, like diabetes, obesity, heart disease. Like we see these in Indian communities, in communities of color. So I just wanted to add on to that really quickly. The next, I'm going to clump two questions together because I think they're related. So Brian asked our thoughts on taking municipal land now dedicated to private use, for an example, golf courses, right, to address food security and food sovereignty. And then we have another, a bit longer question. During the pandemic, the U.S. held on to millions of dollars of aid to Indigenous nations and instead sent tribes body bags instead of PPE. There have been lots of potential alternatives from the fascist colonial system of America discussed here today, and they're good. But in order to get to a post-capitalist society, we have to overthrow the USA. Do you believe that Indigenous First Nations taking their land back from settler colonies is the most effective way to do this? Most tribal governments that I know of have already nationalized their resources. Would you consider decolonization as a fast track to localizing and collectivizing resources? And so I'm going to let our panel respond to both of those questions simultaneously. And then I don't know if anybody saw the front cover of The Atlantic last week, but I'll just drop this in the chat real quick. Okay, cool. So whenever you guys are ready, I know there's a big question, so if you need a few moments to think and kind of mentally prepare your answers, please take that time.
What a great article. That's awesome. Can't wait to dive into it.
Yeah, for folks who may not be able to pull it up at this particular moment, The Atlantic ran on their front cover of the hard copy publication an article that is called "Return the National Parks to Tribes." So for those of you who don't know, Native peoples have lived in all of the areas that are now national parks, and they had to be violently removed. And often the United States used the military, right, to remove Native peoples from parks so that they could enclose the virgin, pristine, untouched wilderness that was, in fact, right, very well tended and heavily managed by Native peoples.
I'm going to drop a little quick answer to one of the parts of this questions, and hopefully the kids are going to let me. Do I believe that Indigenous First Nations taking their land back from the settler colonies is the most effective way to do this? That's a loaded question. I think that overthrowing the city of Arcata or the feds or the state and taking land back in that kind of a way is effective? No. No. I think that there are a lot of people that live here now. There are a lot of people that live here now that were forced to come here through slave trade, through diaspora, through NAFTA, there's a lot of people living here on whatever land you're on now. Do I think that all land that can be given back should be? Yes, absolutely, 100%. Do I think that tribes can caretake, fundamentally caretake land better? Yes, 100%. I'm just going to give one small example of a little bit of a land back story to leave you with, and that is that the Bad River tribe, I don't know if you can still hear me. I can see that my internet's a little funny. The Bad River tribe has, in Wisconsin, just chose to end their 100-year leases. So these are families, and these leases were owned by families that had lived there for, 100 years. So, and so for them, they were their ancestral lands. 100 years, because America, the United States has this wildly short history. It's almost laughable when you think about things from an Indigenous timeline, but it's real to people. And so they did end the leases, but they did so, fundamentally, a core part of being an Indigenous person in my belief. So I'm only speaking for myself now when I say this, is that it is our responsibility to use our lives to cultivate good relationships. Cultivating good relationships and not having our lives and our words cause discord. Sometimes you got to fight for, you got to battle, you got to fight, but you got to be careful. And so when Bad River decided to end those leases, they did so knowing that that would be really hard for those people. They held their line, but they communicated gently. They communicated kindly. They communicated as honorably as they could to maintain those good relationships, or at least do the best they could. I think that we can do this together, and I know that we are up against some wildness. We are up against folks that forgot the earth is alive, and literally it seems like they're in a race to see how much they can destroy as fast as possible. So I know that a battle is real, but I think that we have to be very careful.
Thank you for that. I just dropped the title of a book that I think is that will be helpful for you to think through the last part of your question. And so the part of the question, thinking about tribal governments that have nationalized their resources, right? And so what Clint Carroll talks about in this book, Roots of Our Renewal, are how tribal nations, which are sovereign entities that have a unique relationship with the United States federal government, right? Native peoples are not like another minority, right? We are nations that have a legal relationship with the federal government. And so what he's interested in is, hey, Cherokee Nation, why are we thinking about natural resources instead of kin, instead of relations? Why are we selling or engaging in commodity production? And so he talks about this as resource-based versus relationship-based governance. And due to a history of colonization, right, tribal nations have been put in these situations where if they do not act or present themselves in a way that is legible to the settler state, right? And the settler state doesn't recognize the earth as alive. The settler state recognizes the earth as organized into natural resources, right? And so if you don't engage in that behavior, your political independence or sovereignty is not recognized, right? And so I think Clint Carroll's work will really help kind of complicate that idea of like, oh, well, tribal nations just do the same thing as settler states, right? Another excellent book, by Dina Julia Whitaker, As Long as Grass Grows, A History of Indigenous Environmental Justice. And she calls the Faustian bargain. What did tribes do when their land bases have been taken away? They can no longer sustain themselves with sustainable economies and are often forced into ecologically irresponsible activity just to like feed their membership, right? And so I think kind of contextualizing current situations or maybe conflicts over resource use within a history of colonization would be quite helpful. We only have 5 minutes left of our session. I know it went by super fast, and so I'm going to ask us one more question from the audience, and then I want to respect all of your time and the many activities you have going on today, and let you get back to your busy schedules. And so the next question I want us to think about health impacts. and health disparities from current food systems and the way food sovereignty is linked to various health-related issues as well. And so the text of the question, I can read it for us here. What are concerns about food insecurity and malnutrition? And I'm going to add in their health disparities and hope that's okay with our audience member. What are the issues with food insecurity, malnutrition, and health disparities as they relate to food sovereignty? So I don't know if anybody can speak to some of the health concerns we currently have within Indigenous communities and other communities, but that'll be our last question for today. So if there's anything else you want to sneak in, you can do so now. Oh, and Sienna, I'll write the name. Perfect. Okay. And then I'll tag this one on. If there's any book recommendations you want to provide to folks before we leave today, Sarah's wanting to know what you're all reading right now. So.
I'll put in a plug for our food guide that's coming out next week on newsstands as far as reading material. It really it's touching on everything that we've talked about here. There are pieces in it that have to do with every single topic that's been discussed. And I was going to type a couple of book recommendations for kind of practical gardening in this bioregion into the chat.
Evie, to put you on the spot, I don't know if you want to say a few words about your work with Potawat, right? And the way they're thinking about the relationship between health and food. And maybe tell folks what Potawat is, if there's anybody in the audience that's unfamiliar.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Sometimes it's difficult to land in one place. So I really appreciate that. So the last 4 years, thankfully, I've been able to participate in community gardening at the Potawat Community Food Garden, which is under the United Indian Health Services over here in Wiat Ancestral Territory. And that particular setting was under the vision of a board of elders. And it's meant to resemble that the health of the environment equals the health of the people. And so in regards to having access to food, the garden is about 20 acres, and the greenhouses, I'll just give an example at the beginning of this season. So I love sowing seeds, and I love watching those tables full with germinating seeds. And these particular seeds at the beginning of the season are for plant giveaways. And that's meant for rancherias and local reservations. And so the Potawat Community Food Garden supports, any other private garden within the area and these intertribal services. And so that's also in respect to, completing surveys, like what does the community want? So introducing something maybe that's not culturally appropriate will always be at the discretion of those that are in the community. And I think that with Potawat in particular, it's amazing to see that over a span of 20 plus years, it is so integral still yet on all levels, political, individual, and community wise, and also within their own strategic planning, speaking about how we can support each other's foodways and economies. It's meant to be exactly that and so much more, because there's conservation area, which is meant to protect basketry materials and native plants. And so we've seen the return of wildlife. So again, as we've been saying, it's very intersectional. To meet health needs, it takes, the vision of our elders and listening to the community and understanding what are their health needs and nutritional needs. So that's one particular place to look to, is the Potawat Community Food Garden.
Thank you all so much for everything you have shared with us. Sadly, we have reached the end of our time together. I want to be cognizant of the audience. Give your eyes a break from your screen before the next session. And so go take a quick break, and we'll see you at the next session. We hope you have a lovely conference and have a great rest of your week. So thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. All right. Okay, well, I'll take my own advice and give myself a screen break. Hope to see some of you at the next session. So have a good one, everyone.